Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. This is episode number 486, being recorded on the 14th of February, 2024, with special guest Obinna Nwokolo. I am Sujit, and on Teams with me, we have Obinna, of course, who we're going to chat with in just a minute. But before that, I'd like to cover some news this past week in the Azure space. Been a quiet week. We did cover a lot in the last episode, and for some reason this week there wasn't a whole lot, but there was one that caught my eye. I wanted to bring it to attention to our listeners, and that was the general availability of Azure Monitor Metrics Data Plane API. And what this is using any language SDK, you can now query the metrics in Azure. Not just one metric, you can provide multiple metrics, up to 50 of them per subscription, and kind of start looking at them, collecting them. Maybe you want to store it into some other system internally. Maybe you want to do some analysis of it. So all of that is now available in different languages: .NET, Java, JavaScript, Python, and Go. So if you're looking at an easy way to get to the metrics in Azure, now you can with this metrics SDK and API. And that's kind of most of the news for this week. So without further ado, let's get over to our special guest, Obinna. Thank you so much for joining us. Obinna, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners. Let us know what you do in the Azure space, and we'll take it from there.
Yes, Sujit. My name is Obinna Nwokolo. I'm a PM within the Azure Commerce organization. My focus is on Azure Savings Plan. So I am the current PM who drives that.
Yeah, and one of the things we've talked about a lot in the previous episodes of the podcast, we do see some of these updates, some of these news items about various sort of savings plans that are coming out in Azure for different resources. But it's something we kind of just gloss over it. Or we'll just say, oh yeah, if you take it for so many years, you get this and whatnot. But I'm sure it's more nuanced than that. And I'd like to make sure our customers understand, our listeners understand what it means to be on a savings plan. First of all, what is a savings plan? If we may start with that, and then what does it mean to be on that? What are some of the maybe risks or things to consider for them to choose the right savings plan? And then, of course, how what's the scope of these savings plans? Are they specific to a resource, or does each resource have their own plan? Like, how does that work in Azure? Would be really interesting to know. I know I want to know it.
Absolutely, yeah. So savings plans. The best way to describe it is you probably just take a step back and think about what has come before it and what customers' needs have been historically. And so one of the first savings offerings that Microsoft or Azure has made available was reserved instances. And reserved instances was just a way for customers with stable workloads. And the word stable was something that there's some subtlety around that. Stable workloads customers can purchase reserved instances around that. And when we think about stability, we think about over the course of a day, these instances or these services are being used continuously. It's not, I use it for 3 hours and I don't use it for 7, that sort of stuff. It's running for, let's say, 28 hours out of 24 hours in a day. And the other part of stability is the fact that it's your needs aren't changing. So it's this instance in this region. When you have workloads like that, reserved instances are great because it allows us to go to customers, say like, hey, if you make a commitment for 1 or 3, and there are some reservations that go all the way out to 5 years, you can see very significant savings compared to your pay-go cost. So for that, it's just saying like you're going to use this thing. If you just commit to it, you'll see the charges or the cost drop very significantly. And a lot of customers have said, yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I want to do that. And they jumped into that. Now, obviously, when I talked about some of those caveats around this instance in this region, there are workloads that aren't that stable in that way. And so they've been, looking to us to say like, hey, love a reservation. Just doesn't work for me on my workloads, but I want more cost savings. And that's where a savings plan came from, where it's the idea of like, instead of committing to an instance in a region, you say, let's talk about spend. You're constantly spending X, Y. If you make a monetary commitment, like $5 an hour for the next 1 year or 5 years, or excuse me, 1 year or the next 3 years, you can reach very close to the same levels of savings. And the way that a savings plan is different from reservation, again, I'm not committing to this instance, this region, I'm committing to a set of services within the compute savings family. And so what we launched October of 22 was Azure Savings Plan for Compute. And within that, the eligible services are the majority of the services that we have within compute. So you've got virtual machines, premium our functions, Azure functions, app services, container instances, dedicated hosts. So we launched with those 5 in October. And then the last 4 months, we've added 2 more services. So we added in October Azure Container Apps. And then this January, we added support for Spring Apps. And so what that means is, regardless of what services you actually need, where you are in your evolution to the cloud or your extension of your capabilities in the cloud, around compute services, this is a flexible offering that allows you to continue investing in the way you choose, but not saying you must invest in this specific way. They're complementary services. We joke that's reservations and savings plans are siblings, in that we don't expect you to pick one or the other. It's a mix.
Yeah, that's really very helpful. It certainly is becoming a little clear for me. I'm just curious though, when it comes to compute, we all know that there is like a ton of different tiers in compute, right? They have the, very high memory compute and the very high CPU compute, and then there's the standard levels, the A, B, D, C, I think all the letters of the alphabet, using up the VMs. Does this cover all of that, or do you have to say, hey, I'm really interested in this family of compute,
Yeah, it covers the vast majority. I actually don't know the exact number, but generally speaking, the only types of there are very few limitations where you have reservations and you don't have support for it in the savings plan, and primarily that reason would just be products that are end of life, where it's going away. It had a reservation historically, but because we don't want to incentivize use of it, because again, we have newer and better, more optimized virtual machines, for example, we say, okay, we won't include this, but we will include the resources that are the replacement for it. And so those are what I've seen. I'm not personally responsible for sort of making the selection of what is eligible or what's not. Is what we've seen generally is the guidance has been like, we want parity between those two, and the exceptions are really do exist around end of life.
That's good. Yeah, and I'm just curious, like, what's the user experience when someone goes up to the portal? Let's say they have signed up for the savings plan, and they go up to the portal. Is there any visual indicator that, hey, this resource you're picking is part of the savings plan, or this isn't? Like, how does the customer know that they're picking the right resource, right? Maybe the right SKU or even the right resource for that matter.
So that's a great question. I actually want to take a step back. Before they purchase the savings plan, that's part of helping them do that. It's complicated. There's hundreds of thousands of different products out there, and we don't want to put our customers in a position of having to know these sort of things, keeping that in your mind. And so before the purchase is the experience before the purchase is most important. So it's around recommendations. We don't, the same way we have recommendations for reservations, we want to be able to have the customers feel comfortable that we've done the work to say, this is what's going to save you the money. And so at a high level, how it works is a customer can come either to Azure Advisor or within the purchase experience you've set. And if they say, hey, I'm interested in savings plan, there's a left navigation bar that will include savings plan. They click into that. And then they say, I want to buy, and they'll click on add button. And what they're presented with is an experience that's similar to reservations. We try to make sure that, again, they're siblings, and we provide a recommendation. So we'll default to, I can speak to things about benefit scope a little bit more if you want to, but by default, it'll say, hey, for your entire, whether you're in EA account or an MCA account, it's going to default to a shared scope. It says, hey, you're billing for your entire billing profile or your billing account. Here's what we recommend for 3 years. And it's going to be a monetary dollar amount. And that recommendation is based on your usage over the last so much reservations. We look at your last 30 days, the last 60 days, the last 7 days, and we say, what's this customer spending every single hour? And what is the monetary amount that'll maximize their savings? It's not focusing on coverage and utilization, saying like, hey, I want to pick a dollar amount that you'll always use every hour. We understand that some hours you won't use the full amount. Other hours you fully use it and still have on demand. But when you do these calculations, and then just as an anecdote, each one of these recommendations is 520,000 different distinct calculations to get to this number for you. We say, okay, well, this is the number. If your usage, your historic usage follows your future usage follows your past usage, this is the number that we've come up with that will save you the most. And once a customer makes that purchase, we do the work for you. Reservation is an active process, and in certain cases, it totally makes sense. I know these workloads are going to be around, so I can keep an eye on it, and I'll assign a reservation to this particular VM, and I'll move on, and I'll keep glancing at it, making sure that it's being used. With a savings plan, it's more passive. It's almost like you've gone to Vanguard or something, says, hey, invest my money, figure this out. We look at every single hour when your usage comes in, and we say, okay, here's every resource you've used, and each one of these resources is going to have a different discount under savings plan, and say, okay, I'm going to apply the benefit, your commitment. So you committed $10 amount, you're basically prepaid for $10. This first resource has 50% discount. Another resource we have 33% discount. Another one has 40%. Well, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck is having that 50% discount applied first. And so we will automatically apply the discounts for the benefits that have apply the benefit to the discounts that have the greatest discount. And we'll burn down your commitment over the course of that hour. And the hope is you fully burn it out. And so for all that usage, it's discounted. There may be some hours where you have a little bit of leftover. It's not great. It's not perfect. But over the course of time, this is the best savings for you. And in that sense, it's passive. These are passive savings versus an active, I must use this. And because if you look at our pricing pages, stuff like, you'll see the vast majority of let's say VMs are fully covered by a savings plan. You don't have to pick and choose. Because again, at the end of the day, there's two parts of that. We've done the analysis to say, yeah, you can save money here. And so here's our recommendation. And then the other part of that is as things evolve, we add more VMs, they automatically become eligible, that sort of stuff. You don't have to actively think about, hey, what did they add last week? Does it make sense for me? Should I use it? Should I change my needs to maximize my benefits? We don't want that. The right resources are the right resources for you. And you shouldn't have to make compromises around that based on trying to maximize a benefit.
That's very helpful. And the spend then, is that something that's aggregated or averaged out over a period of time to say, okay, the customer is kind of spending the right amount, or is it per hour, or is it strictly per hour?
So around the recommendation, we look at we simulate. We say, okay, hour number one, there's 720 hours in 30 days. So hour number one, you use this mix of different products, and your list. And by the way, we only look at things that you paid for on demand. If you have resources that you use that were covered by some other benefit, like a reservation, they're already covered. So there's no need to think about them. So here's all your on-demand stuff that you used. Here's what you paid for them. And then we say, okay, well, what would have been the perfect savings plan for this particular hour? Okay, you spent, based on that mix, we say, well, your on-demand charges were $11.50. $4.20 would have been the perfect amount for hour number one. Then we take hour number one and say, let's pretend you did buy a savings plan for that. Let's simulate that for hour 2, 3, all the way to 720. And we say, great, for this hour number one, which had a $4 and X perfect amount, let's compare your cost. So this simulation came with a certain cost, and your actual cost were a different value. Was the actual greater than the simulated cost? If the simulated cost was lower, which means it saved money, you say, great, this is a candidate, put it aside. Let's repeat that process for hour number 2 all the way to 720. That's why there's a lot of calculations, and that's why we should do this for you. When we go through all that, we say, great, we've got these, we had 720 hours, we have 40 candidates. Which one's the best one? The best one is the one that saved you the most money. And so we say, pick that one. It's nothing more simple than that, because at the end of the day, this is a savings vehicle. So that's what we want to return to you. So in that context, these are distinct hourly calculations, because it's a distinct hourly benefit. And yeah, we just want to, when we aggregate that, we say over time, this saves you the most money. And again, there's an implicit assumption that the past guides the future. If and when there are, like, if you know that, hey, the last 7 days is really reflective of what my usage will look like, you can, within Azure Advisor, you can say, I want to change my look back period. We're going to add that in the Azure portal too, but it's just currently not there. Or you say, the last 30 days isn't really reflective. Use the last 60 days. You can make that change too and get a slightly different recommendation.
Great. And when it comes to using things like DevOps to deploy resources, like a lot of our customers would do, I mean, I used the portal as an example, but I know most of our customers don't actually use the portal. They use ARM to deploy resources. Is there anything different or special they have to do at that point in terms of, the SKUs? Like, it's just automatically applied as, just deploy as usual, and then the savings are automatically applied based on what the benefit is attached to the subscription level? Is that how it works? Like, at what level?
It varies. Great question.
Yeah.
So it varies. So we give customers the ability, just like in reservations, there's 4 levels where you can say, I want to limit or target the scope. Shared says free for all. Everyone's eligible. Doesn't mean everyone's going to get it. There are benefit rules, and we can talk about that later. But shared scope is at the very top. It is the most broad. The next most broad is at the management group level. So you say, I want to give it to this management group. And management group is just a collection of subscriptions. So you say, I want to target this management group. It starts, then you go one level down and say, I want this particular subscription to get it. And the lowest level is the resource group. The more narrow the benefit target is, greater possibility of waste. So like resource group, the customer gets to choose, but it becomes, and I don't want to use the word risky, but you get my point. It's a resource group is a subset of all your usage, and so if it's generally, and we generate recommendations for the resource group, the subscription, and the shared scope. We do not currently generate one for the management group, but it is a top ask, and we are actively working on that, and that will give customers the ability to have recommendations at any level they want to deploy at. And to your point around the automated sort of deployment outside of using the UI, the scope of the savings plan is defined, and it doesn't care how the deployment occurred. And so it just says every hour I see here's the usage that's associated with the scope of this savings plan. Let's start working and figuring out how best to apply the benefit to maximize savings.
Great. And just to kind of maybe quantify this even more when it comes to savings, right? Like, what should customers expect? Like, what's a range, I guess, of percentage of savings? Obviously everyone's going to want to know that, right?
The maximum savings.
Sure.
Sure. So let's talk about that. There's some variability. So at the high number, so I should talk about a few things. Number one, that when we talk about savings, when we communicate savings, the discounts are off list price. And so for reservations, we say you can save up to 72% off list. And for savings plan, you can save up to 65%. So obviously there's a difference between those two. And the difference is that flexibility, the automated nature of a savings plan. It's doing all this work for you, and you don't have to build really robust FinOps capabilities in order to maximize your savings as you do with reservations. So for customers, it's a bit of a mix. Again, you make your decisions around that. But in actuality, the discounts, they're individual. For each product level, we have discounts, or each product it has a different level of discounts, and it varies based on product and region, and it follows what we have around reservations. It's hard. The discount for a 3-year longer commitment is greater than the discount for the 1 year. The discount has nothing to do with how much you commit. If you commit $1 for 3 years or $200 for 3 years, you're going to see the same discounts for each one of those products. We don't want to incentivize customers to overcommit. We want them to say, this is what I need, this is what I'm going to buy, and terms really the important part. But when you talk about practical discounts customers receive, it kind of depends. I hate saying that. It depends. It's the discounts based on list. So if this is a customer that already that maybe has what we call like a volume discount, their volume discount is off list. Savings plan is also off list. And so the volume discount isn't stacked on top of the savings discount. We look at your usage and we say, well, for example, the list price for this VM for an hour is $1. You are paying 80 cents. The savings plan discount might be 78 cents. Okay, when you run, we're going to say, well, that discount's better. So we're going to give you the savings plan price for this, and we're going to move through that. We might have the other cases where you have a deep discount on a product and the numbers flip. We're like, well, this doesn't benefit you to give you the savings plan price. We'll just use your regular pay-go price. So because of it varies on what products you use and what your economics were coming into the agreement, we can only talk about the marketing says up to 65. The beauty of reservations of our recommendations is when we say, hey, you should commit $11.82 an hour, we also tell you we project this will save you 28.95% compared to your pay-go usage. And so that's specific to you because we looked at your price sheet and we looked at your usage, your mix. If you're using services that tend to have higher savings plan discount, certain VMs and that sort of stuff, awesome. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, if you're using services that have lower discounts, functions, you'll see a little bit less. It just depends on what the customer is using.
Right. And then in terms of, keeping an eye on this, I think you were talking about this earlier, kind of monitoring what my spend is. Typically, at least when I do it for my subscription, I go to the cost, the cost and spend section of the portal under the subscription. Is that where this is also surfaced? Like how can they keep an eye on, what's my sort of metric, hour by hour metric in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So usage, just like with reservations, you can go into your section that says, hey, reservations, here are all my reservations, and click into it. And you can look at the last 30 days, the last 7 days of utilization. You can pick a custom period. You can see what's going on right there. That's a sort of a generic view. You can do the same thing with savings plans. You can also go into a cost analysis tool where you can look at how, in the context of all the different sort of benefits, reservation, savings plan, pay as you go. You can see how all of that stacks up. You can see what's being, what's using what, how are you paying for what product. There's also, we also understand, and we are actively working on additional features to like a standardized cost savings report where a customer can come in and say, I'm going to look at this reservation or this savings plan, or look at all of this and say, what have you actually saved me? And in that case, we're looking at hey, here's this usage that was covered by this benefit. It would have cost you X, you've paid Y. The spread is what you've saved from a percentage or a dollar perspective. We know that's super important for customers, so we want to make that available. And so there's more and more insights. Part of what we want to do, we did with Savings Plan, and we'll continue extending and saying, like, this is a benefit. There are going to be a set of questions customers have. Let's make sure we can expose a core set of answers within our core experience, within our cost analysis experience. We also will allow customers to export their cost and usage information and put it in a third-party app to do further analysis. If they want to compare across the cloud, or they want to drill in and dig in, we allow them to do that sort of things too.
And finally, I'm just curious, and it sounds like this offering will benefit, let's say, small to medium customers, right? People who don't have like this massive enterprise discount plan already, right? They're paying as you go. They may have just set it on autopilot for a while, not realizing that there's savings to be had, and this can can do that. Is there like a minimum bar of like they should be spending? Like let's say they're spending, I don't know, 50 cents an hour or 10 cents an hour today. Uh, could they still benefit like with the savings plan?
We do have a limit, I believe, for USD. It is 1/100th of a cent. 1/100th of a like. It is a tiny number. No, actually, no. I think. Just all kidding aside, I think it's a fraction of a cent is the actual number it is. And so, yes, you can benefit from this. The point of this is consistent spend. And if you were a customer, and you came into the purchase experience and you said, "Hey, what's my recommendation?" And we said, like, "No, there's no savings here because you're too sporadic with your usage. There'd be
Right.
a ton of waste." You would not get a recommendation. You could still purchase it, but we wouldn't like advise you to purchase that. But yeah, we've actually seen customers who start very small. I want to dip my toe into this, so maybe I eventually need $50 an hour, but I'm going to buy $1 an hour, and then it's stackable effectively. You can buy $1 an hour now, and then buy 20, and then 25, and before you know, you're at your number. But there isn't really a minimum. It's more about consistency in the spending.
And then I think the last question that I have for you is how does spot instances fit into this, right? Because I know I've used spot instances a lot in the past to get some amount of savings,
Mhm.
right? I know there are obviously some caveats with spot instances; they're not guaranteed. But when it comes, how does this play into the mix when it comes to savings plans, or is that like a completely different path the customers would
It's
take?
it's a different path, but we actually want to talk about all four of those generally speaking. Like, I should have maybe primed this conversation with that. From a software perspective, savings plan covers the infrastructure costs. So compute, memory, that sort of stuff. That's what it's covering. And that's the same thing with reservations. Reservation is also focused on infrastructure, but obviously you might be running, there's a software component to that. So we've had historically, and we continue to have, and it's perfectly well with this, is Azure Hybrid Benefit, which is going to cover Windows Server and SQL Server, those sort of costs around there. And so it's like, great. So you see there's a symmetry around there. Spot is a little different. So we've got at this point, I've talked about 3 types of savings benefits. Spot is the fourth one that says, hey, you have workloads that are interruptible. We have capacity that is idle at certain times. If you want to leverage it at a really deep discussion, you can do that. And so, in a sense, when you are running Spot VM, you can't double dip in terms of using the savings plan benefit to use it, but it is there. And so there's certain workloads. So if we sort of define if we take a workload centric approach, says, here are my interruptible workloads, Spot. Here's my super stable workloads, reservations. Everything else, savings plan.
Right.
So they're complementary. Spot is the cousin. If those two are similar, Spot is the cousin.
Good one. Thank you. All right, no, that's great. That sort of covers all of my question. I think it certainly has uh, given me a good insight into all these various plans that we have to offer. Um, I guess all of these sound better than pay as you go. So I'm
Absolutely.
sure our customers should take a look at this. Is there like I guess there's some resources that we could share with our customers, which I'll get from you afterwards, and we could put it along with the show notes. But as you mentioned earlier, it seems like as simple as going to the portal and looking for that options for the savings plan, and then there's a guided experience that they would have. Correct?
Absolutely. Yes. We hope it's simple. I'm always listening to feedback and trying to evolve the experience, but we want to make it as simple for the customers as possible.
Great. Well, Obinna, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to our listeners on this very, very important topic, and we look forward to get some details from you and share it with them.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.